Hi, my name is Lee Teague. I'm the Director of Grassroots Development and Public Relations for the North Carolina Public Charter Schools Association. Thank you for coming today. Lately, charter schools, there's been a pretty steady drumbeat that charter schools have not been good stewards of taxpayer dollars. I had seen one commentator say that it goes into a black hole. We are here today to address that issue, and we will hear from Eddie Goodall and Marcus Brannon on the subject. Eddie Goodall is the Executive Director of the North Carolina Public Charter School Association. Eddie?
Thank you. I'd like to first thank Representative Yarborough for being with us today, and Senator Tart. We appreciate your support for charter schools. Well, it's National Charter Schools Week, but we should be celebrating, but as you guys know, there's so much going on here and in the schools with assessments coming up that it's kind of more work than assessments probably for some of you. But we do want to acknowledge the successes of the charter schools in North Carolina over the last almost 20 years. The House Bill 955 was filed about a month ago, 19 years ago, on April 12th, I guess it was, which later became the Charter School Act. So we're almost 20 years old. And again, the charter schools have done well with proficiency as well as the percentage of our schools reaching growth. We've exceeded the district schools the years that I've been involved, the last 5 years in this business, and we're very proud of that. But, you know, some things have come about with some closings recently that have caused the public to question accountability in charter schools. And even though we might look at this session here and realize that that might be on kind of the back burner right now with so many other important issues, our association and our charter schools, we want to face that issue. We want to address it and be part of the solution, intelligent solutions to that. And by the way, when we talk about having 147 charter schools and the growth we've had, that's from our perspective in the Office of Charter Schools. If you look at parents out there, let me remind you that in 1996 we had 7.5 million people in the state. Today we have 10 million. So 100 schools then is the equivalent adjusted for population to 133 schools now. So parents actually have seen only about 16 or 17 more schools in the state, again, adjusted for population. So that explosive growth hasn't looked that explosive to all the parents across the state. 58 schools have been authorized since the cap was lifted. As far as I know, 3 of those 58 opened and then failed. But you know, it was kind of interesting. The 3 were in Charlotte that I'm thinking of, or I think that the only 3 were in Charlotte, and that happened in a fairly short time frame. So we need to look at that. Again, that 3% out of 58 is only 5%, but we care about that 5%. We want to know what happened there and what we can do about it. So, you know, the question is, are charter schools financially accountable? I say the answer is yes, but certainly there are improvements that can be made. I think the first thing that the public needs to do is be more aware of what oversight exists now. I mean, to make intelligent improvements, we've got to know what exists now, and I think there's probably been a good bit of underreporting, and we're partly to blame. We haven't talked about the things there. Now, we've passed out some talking points, and I won't go over all those, but you see there's 10 or 12 there that apply to charter schools, some of which have been added in the last year. For example, this year, actually today, the State Board will look at a recommendation by the Charter School Advisory Board to authorize 17 or 18 schools to open next year. That vote will come next month in June, which will be 14 months before those schools open. Student First, as you remember in Charlotte, was approved in March of the same year it opened. So it was approved 5 months before it opened. I'm not apologizing for Student First. Their board failed, but I'm just saying some of the solutions we've already seen. So one of the things I'd like to point out also is that I think in the reporting by the media, I think taxpayers and the public has understood or gotten the impression that they're on the hook for the debt for these charter schools when they close. I kept seeing $600,000 owed by Student First over and over again, and the impression you would get would be that that was going to be borne by the taxpayers. What happens is, most of you know, is the state funds the charters and the local education agencies fund the charters based on the students there, and then that's it. The spigot is cut off. If schools keep accumulating debt, like the $600,000 that Student First did, that's borne by the board of directors. So the state doesn't guarantee the charter debts. I think that's important. We think there can be improvements in the system, though. I owned and managed a CPA firm for several decades, actually, and have that background and care about this and have tried to see what I could find out, and maybe what failed, what protocols failed, what protocols and standards we need. Our recommendations would be, for one thing, that we try to determine earlier what the debt is of the charter school. The ISIS, the cash management system, reports basically the cash transactions. So we see the bank statement. I'm not sure we see the credit card statement, if you will, early enough. So debt could accumulate, not be reported on budgets, and we could be discovered upon an audit or a visit to the charter school. That may have happened at Kinston. I'm not sure. But that type thing can happen if there's no way to account for the debt accumulating within a school. Another thing I think we can improve on, especially with the new schools, is to change our policies so that so the schools have to demonstrate that they either have applications or they have enrollment for the money they're going to get. I think the way we do it now, for Concrete Roses, for example, in Charlotte, I think their first year enrollment was supposed to be about 400. I believe they are funded that in their first year, and that adjustment comes with the second, third. Charter schools get 3 state allotments, 3 big chunks, 34%, 33, and 33. I think Concrete Roses got that chunk of money as it opened, didn't have the kids there, and then it was adjusted with a second installment in November, but it was too late. They had already, again, accumulated debt, not made it. So my recommendation, again, is just that the state make sure that we know people are going to be in those seats before they're paid. And thirdly, I'll close by saying I think the state board ought to be given the authority to do that if it needs it legislatively. And I haven't seen that in the bill, Lee, but I think that's something they've talked about and may need, and we certainly support that. So let me just summarize by saying charter schools, again, we have the most vested interest in this whole issue of financial accountability. We care. The high-quality education is our goal. And we know that financial stress and high-quality education have a direct relationship. The schools have to be financially stable to keep having a good education outcomes. So we want to, again, be part of that. We want intelligent improvements made, and certainly we're willing to work with any groups to make sure that happens. So, and again, thank you for coming. And Lee, Marcus, next. Yep. This is Marcus Brandon. I'll introduce him. Former representative and is executive director your title, Marcus?
That's what they say.
Executive director of CarolinaCAN, and I guess most of you folks have heard that. Thanks, Marcus.
Well, it's good to be back, and I just wanted to make some brief comments about the fix that we tried to do for financial accountability and accountability period. I do want to state that just because you have accountability measures does not mean that people are actually being held accountable. I would say that charter schools are held more accountable than any other institution there is. We actually get our schools shut down. I have schools in my district who have not been accountable to the same standards for 28, 30 years that will reopen next August, and all 600 of those kids will continue to go to that school. And that's not necessarily the case with charter schools. So I do want to make it clear about accountability. And just because you have accountability standards doesn't mean that people are actually being held accountable. But the fix that we use for this, for the particular financial accountability piece, is someone stuck in the budget. They didn't get it through a committee or a bill or a standalone bill, a $50,000 escrow account that charter schools must have. And I understand the purpose of it, but the unintended consequences of this is that schools like I'm a founding board member of the Point Leadership Academy in High Point. That school would never have been able to get off the ground if we would have had that provision. We did not have $50,000 of capital or any capital at all to be able to secure a $50,000 bond. This potentially, the unintended consequences of this will eliminate the small, innovative charter schools that we all intended for charter schools to be. And it does pave a way for other charter schools that can absorb those costs, more the bigger charter schools, more the corporate charter schools that can absorb that cost, to be able to pave the way through. And we can create separate systems if the General Assembly and the public are not aware of policies that come down that really, I don't think it's intentional, but it does present a huge problem, because when you're a charter school, you can't just go to the bank because your charter is only for so many years. You can't just go to the bank and say, hey, I need this loan. You have to be able to prove that you're going to be able to stay in business long enough to be able to get the loan. Now, for example, my charter school was able to own their own, we own our own building within 4 years. So yes, now we can be able to get that $50,000 requirement. But when we first started, we would have never been able to do that. There wasn't a bank in the world that would give us the time of the day. And these are the problems that you will have with small, innovative charters that are trying to do the things that we elected when we enacted these laws, which is to be able to deal with issues that in the community that normally are not being able to be dealt with. And so when we eliminate that, we eliminate the very meaning of why we do that, why we built charters and why we started charters. And it's not because teachers are bad in the public school, or the traditional public schools. It's not because principals are bad. It's because there are different issues that have different ways of dealing with it, and charters offer that. We can pick 5 schools that fail, but I can show you 120 that are doing well. So so it's one of those numbers games that people play to try to point out 5 failing schools or 3 failing schools that did bad in financial accountability. But I can tell you that charter schools have 2 hands tied behind their back when it comes to finances. Whenever my heater breaks, I have to write a check out for $8,000 to the heater man. I don't get to call county and somebody comes and fixes it. So we have a lot of issues that have come before us that does not come in. And my charter school provides food and transportation for everyone. We don't get $1 for that. And so it really deserves a fair conversation about just because you have 1-2% of people that fail, and we could see that in any industry and across the board, that you're going to have some good ones and you're going to have some bad ones. But in the charter schools, I think if you look at the percentages, people are doing extremely well, but we cannot allow public policy to dictate, what type of charters that we have. And we certainly don't want over-regulation of the charter industry that prevents the little innovative charter school to be able to produce the results that we and many of the charters for the better part of 20 years have been producing. So I appreciate your time. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be glad to do it at that time.
Let me add one thing to that, but stay here for questions. That provision is in that series of charter school statutes in 14A, and it was put in the budget last year, but it was also House Bill 1178 last year, filed by 4 Democrats, that wasn't heard. That same language got in the budget. Again, I don't know how either, Marcus. But as I've said, the spigot is cut off. Once you get per pupil funding, you don't get any more. So the money that would be in escrow that would come from these people's pockets would go to pay creditors and unnecessarily. That's a business transaction, a risk creditors might have taken by giving them credit. So it just doesn't make any sense. It's almost akin to having your son get to a stage where he could have an allowance and mow the grass and say, well, before you start mowing the grass, you need to put up an escrow to fund a lawnmower in case this is broken or something. It just doesn't make any sense. What we should do is be more judicious in that funding up front instead of creating this back-end reserve for something. So
it won't actually be a reserve. If anybody closes down and only has $50,000 worth of debt, then I would like to see how in the world, why would they were closing anyway? So most of the cases that you've seen where charter schools have closed down, that $50,000 wouldn't have helped them one way or the other. So this is really something that's hurting on the front end, not the back end. But there are lots of things, like Eddie said, that we can do to make sure that people don't get there. And I would ask that not only the General Assembly, but the DPI spend more time of figuring those things out than trying to figure out how the ways that we can cut people, and then start figuring out, because, you know, especially urban charter schools, which or charter schools that are led by African Americans. These are very difficult things. We don't have $50,000 and that we can just go pick up. And so, but we on average, urban charter schools educate about 28% more African Americans than others. The schools are very diverse and doing incredible work, but we can't take that away. Sometimes you need people in the community to do the community work. It's not about the education piece. It's about the wraparound service. It's about English as a second language. It's about teenage pregnancy. It's about HIV/AIDS. It's about crime and drugs and poverty and all of the things that we have to deal with, why kids don't come to school ready to learn. And those are the things that we offer. And if those people in the community are going to be able to do that, we cannot cut the belt out from under them. We've got to be able to create an environment where all charter schools, the big ones and the small ones, are able to thrive in the state of North Carolina.
Before we take your questions, we have a couple of leaders of charter schools here with us today. Don McQueen from Torchlight in Durham and Stephen Gay from East Wake in Zebulon. I'd like them to step forward and help Eddie and Marcus answer your questions.
questions about the $50,000 or the accountability or any other charter questions? It was put in the budget last year. It is there. It calls for a cash or other type of escrow. That could be a bond purchased, any type of collateral that would be again a reserve or an escrow account to pay costs of. I think it's worded like to pay the cost of maybe the administrative cost of closing down the school. I can tell you that all the schools that have heard about this have gotten very excited. They're going to have to put up. Actually, it's kind of the equivalent of Representative Hall's House Bill 96 is what it is. That bill requires charter officers that have any influence over the budget to be liable for the school debts. This is basically doing the same thing in advance. It's saying put up your resources, personal resources, to guarantee that we'll have $50,000 to do something with if you go out of business. The better bet, as Marcus has said, is to work with DPI, the Division of Business and Finance, and come up with accounting methods to have better oversight over the money. It's applicable for schools applying after a certain date, and my understanding is from schools that are opening now, they applied before the date, but they've been told by the Office of Charter Schools it's on their ready to open schedule that they're supposed to do it, and it's been they've been told by Dr. Medley that he recommends they go ahead and do it. And it's also, and for existing schools, it applies upon their renewal. And of course, 10 or 12 schools a year will find this out. I don't think many of our members know about it yet. More questions? We would like to have it removed. Yes, I think it. Well, there's some difference of opinion within the charter community. Unfortunately, there's another organization that disagrees with us on this, and understandably, Representative Yarborough and others, when they get different messages, I understand the confusion you might have, and so what I think we've just got is inaction on this because there have been two messages from two different groups. But ours is certainly that the $50,000 not only won't help anything, it will actually shut down new charters. As Marcus said, there will not be any non-EMO charters filing applications and having to do this.
That's right.
Yeah, thank all of you. We really appreciate it.